And we started to realize that there is a culture issue happening it was a consistent thread throughout every story we heard in that room. And so we said, who do we need to be as a field? Like, what are our hopes and dreams for this profession? If we want to put something forward, what do we want that to be to really shift where we are?
Hello, and welcome to Student Affairs Now. I'm your host, Keith Edwards. Today, we're talking about reimagining the workforce in higher education and student affairs. ACPA has just released the report from the 21st Century Employment and Higher Education Task Force, and we are joined by ACPA President Andrea Domingue and Task Force Co-Chair Roshaunda Breeden to discuss the context, analysis of the roots in white supremacist culture, and recommended antidotes for action. I'm a big fan. This is a terrifically insightful and helpful document. I'm so excited to learn more from the folks who are joining with us today. Student Affairs Now is the premier podcast and online learning community for thousands of us who work in, alongside, or adjacent to the field of higher education and student affairs. We release new episodes every week on Wednesdays. Find details about this episode or browse our archives at studentaffairsnow.com. This episode is sponsored by Reshape. Go to reshape.org to learn how they can work with you to create a just, caring, and thriving world. This episode is also sponsored by Vector Solutions, formerly EverFi, the trusted partner for more than 2,000 colleges and universities. Vector Solutions is the standard of care for student safety, well-being, and inclusion. As I mentioned, I'm your host, Keith Edwards. My pronouns are he, him, his. I'm a speaker, consultant, and coach, and you can find out more about me at keithedwards.com. I'm broadcasting from Minneapolis, Minnesota, at the intersections of the ancestral homelands of both the Dakota and the Ojibwe peoples. Let's get to our conversation. I'm so grateful for the two of you for joining us today. Let's kick off with some introductions. Andrea, why don't you go ahead and get us started?
Thanks, Keith. Hi, everybody. My given name is Andrea Domingue. Everybody calls me Dre. Yep, like the rapper. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm recording today from the ancestral land of the Catawba, just outside of Charlotte, North Carolina. A lot about me. So my campus day job is at Davidson College. I am the Chief Strategy Officer for Student Life there. It's a newer role after doing about 20 years working diversity, equity, and inclusion work. I also am currently one of the adjunct lecturers for UW La Crosse, their master's program and their doctoral program. So I'm a scholar practitioner in that way. I'm probably most known right now as the current ACPA president, so College Student Educators International. And for those that don't know much about us, we are one of the premier associations. Our tagline is boldly transforming higher education. And we're mostly trying to move and advance higher education through advocacy, outreach, professional development, and our research.
Awesome. Thank you for being here. Roshanda, tell us a little bit more about you.
I sure will. First, I want to say shout out to Dre. Dre, you've been doing an amazing job as president. And so I'm delighted to share this episode with you. But yeah, shout out to Dre, y'all. Yeah. Also, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. I'm Roshaunda Breeden, she, her pronouns. I'm currently an assistant professor in educational leadership and higher education at East Carolina University, which is in Greenville, North Carolina, on the traditional homeland of the Tuscarora Indians. And so that's my day job. Although I've been a faculty member for the last year now, I've also worked in higher education and student affairs for the last 13 years at historically Black colleges and universities and historically white institutions. So I have a background in residential life, orientation, diversity programming, academic advising, college access, all the things, but my first love is housing. I am a housing kid.
I know that.
Yes. And so I love this work and I'm such a huge fan of the podcast. I also have to shout out Doctors Porter, Kroom, and Soleil for their Black feminist research episode. It's quickly becoming one of my favorites. So go listen to that if you haven't. And my connection to the topic. So I am currently the chair for the ACPA Presidential Task Force on 21st Century Employment in Higher Education, which we'll talk a little bit more about in just a second. But I don't want to just center myself. I definitely want to center all of the work and labor done by the task force members who helped contribute such a dynamic document. So shout out to all of y'all. We'll talk more about y'all later, but this is essentially a labor of love from ACPA to its members.
Awesome. So Dre, you're ACPA president. Each president typically has like a major initiative and a big impetus. Is this yours?
Yes and no.
All right.
So,
well, how do we get here? How did this come to be?
Yeah.
And then we'll talk about the task force. Yeah.
So
how
I'm
did
going
we get
to
here?
try to be succinct. Well, one, before I can even get into the task force, I think I just want to name that, higher education and employment has been an ongoing grappling for decades. And so early on, different iterations, what have you. And so what we're talking about today is not necessarily a new topic. I think it's an exacerbated topic that requires more urgency and more attention than I think we as collectively as a field have really done so. So just to kind of help people think about higher ed, what was happening, and I like to think about pre-COVID and now living with COVID times and other things that before we even got into 2020, it's not to say in that kind of dramatic way, we were already talking about challenges with exempt versus non-exempt employees, the ways in which some people did not get paid, compensated for their time. I'm thinking a lot about our live-on staff who did not have great support institutionally for boundaries in their work. I'm thinking about folks that, deans on call. I'm thinking about the ways in which student activities folks, fraternity, sorority, live, DEI folks were doing a lot of, on the ground programming. So we were already having conversations about workload, sustainability, burnouts. We were already talking about discrepancies in salaries, especially at the entry, mid-level in particular. We were already talking about challenges of not being able to sustain at different institutions because there wasn't opportunities for growth or support or what have you. We were already talking about climate around racial justice, decolonization, queer trans issues, immigration, and how these climates were very challenging for minoritized folks. So these are not, forget also disability. We're already talking about the ways in which folks for a variety of disabilities did not have full access to higher education and employment. So these are not new topics. I think there was some conversation or rumblings we should look at this, but COVID happened, right? And it wasn't just COVID. I think also we were dealing with grapplings of racial justice, our socio-political climate, what have you. I want to name that for some people navigating COVID, they got the privilege of being able to, have a job, right? I knew a lot of colleagues who were furloughed or in the middle of searches and could not find anything in a sustained way. I knew some people that had the ability, the privilege to be able to work from home and work remotely, while some people still had to very much be on campus, navigating their personal safety and what have you. I think what we learned, are collectively a couple of things, is that one, some of the work in higher education that we used to say, not we, but some people would say it's not possible to do in different ways became really possible, right? I think a lot about my time running an identity-based center during COVID from home, right? And I was always told I had to be around, be available for students, what have you. And I was able to run support groups and events and do bias response from my living room. And so I think there became, personal and collective questioning about why are we doing this way? This is the way that I personally want to do it. Am I really truly supported? Is my institution really thinking about me? So that is a larger backdrop in which we were entering, in which I was entering into my presidency. I will shout out Vernon Wall was the first associate president for us who had to first deal with COVID, and then Danielle Morgan Acosta also had to. And so a lot of their lens, while this was very much an attention of the association, they couldn't quite get to it. They were trying to respond to how do we do a virtual conference? How do we, support our members as we're navigating things? So I had the first opportunity to really focus on this. I will also name that before we even got into COVID times, it was a strategic priority of the association. We had a strat plan we had just released in 2020. And one of our we have 5 areas of focus, and one of our buckets is association leadership and presence. And it was specifically naming how do we retain our employees in higher education? How do we address burnout? And how do we do that in particular for our entry level? There's a lot of research and data that entry-level folks in particular are the ones to leave the field the quickest and the hardest to retain for a variety of reasons. And so we knew that before all these dynamics were happening, and that was an intention. So I named it in my presidential address. It was something I had already been thinking about. And I literally, within the first month of being president, wrote a charge. And what was important to me were a couple of things as I was writing it is that, and I'll name, it's fair, NASPA had put out a report, CUPA HR had put some things out. So we were already seeing a lot of reports about what was happening.
Right.
And I'm going to be candid and say, they were telling us what we already knew, right? Yep. They were telling us a lot about what we knew about salary and wanting to go remote and these different things, but there wasn't a lot of adding the conversation about minoritized population. There wasn't a conversation about the levels. There wasn't a conversation about different college types. And so when I thought about this charge, I wanted to make sure we were adding to the conversation, not just repeating it. Being an ACPA longtime, loyalist, we like to have tangible resources for our members they can use right now, like so they can actually implement and actually make a change on the campus. And so as I was writing it was very clear we had to have some usable document that our members could use immediately to impact change. So all those were important to me overall. And so when I thought about how to do this, there were two things in my mind. And one is definitely about Roshanda, and the other is about my experience through the Strategic Imperative for Racial Justice Decolonization. I think some people know I was a part of that guiding document with Dr. Stephen Quay, Rachel Aho, D.L. Stewart, Dean Squire, who else was a part of that? Melissa Jacob Beard, Flo Guido, Alex Lang. We were all the bigger folks that were doing it. And we got together and in real time in Detroit to have an in-person dialogic conversation. And from that, drafted some of the documents. So I knew that was important, especially in Zoom time. We got to be together somehow. Luckily, we had funding to do that. And then when I thought about how do we move us from the charge to actual being in community, was Roshanda. So I'm a big fangirl of Roshanda too. I had just been following her. We have a lot of mutual friends, but didn't really have a chance to work together until now. And so, I'm a big believer. Like, we have some shared people in common we get along with, and clearly we should too. But Roshanda's dissertation, I was really impressed with the innovative ways that she approached research, but all the way that it was so deeply connected to community and community impact. And so when I thought about leadership, it was Roshanda. And so I was very grateful that she had said yes. And from her saying yes, I worked with Chris Moody and her to collectively come up with a really big list of people to join us. And so I'm going to stop there so Roshanda can talk about how we got from her yes to being in Raleigh in the document. So
yeah, you got to captain the ship. How did that go?
Well, that is an interesting conversation of how I got there, but I do want to also shout out Chris Moody. He's been amazing.
Yes.
In helping me get all of my ducks in a row, and he makes things look so easy, and he just takes care of things. So shout out to Chris. But yeah, Dre reached out because of my dissertation research, and I also do research around Black women in senior level positions in student affairs, and I wrote an article about it, and I got her email. And at first I was like, absolutely not. I'm not taking on any additional labor. I was like, Dre knows so many of my friends. So like a friend of my friends is my friend. I was like, I don't think I can do it. But that same month, I saw so many folks on social media, particularly entry-level professionals, saying the field isn't what I thought it was. I'm not enjoying myself. I'm leaving for XYZ experience. And at first, my brain went to, well, it's a season of transition, so people are moving out of all fields, right? And so I just kind of dismissed it, if I'm honest. But then I started seeing folks at the middle level and the senior level. And then I started to do some research and listen to the podcasts, including this podcast, and some other podcasts and tweets. And folks were just sharing this same underlying issue and concern, and I couldn't shrug it off anymore. And so I knew something was there. And honestly, in our field, I think it's easy to complain about what's not being done. I've been guilty of saying, this is terrible. Someone needs to do something. And when I got Dre's email, I had to have a conversation with myself. Like, you can't just complain. You also have to be a part of the work you want to see for our profession. And so that is when I decided to connect, and I wanted to bring our community together in a way that could center voices, Dre gave us the charge. She wanted people at different levels, different types of people, different institutions. And I wanted to be a part of that conversation, getting all of those folks in a room so we could really talk about where our field was going. And again, it was a conversation like, if not me, then who? So I think that's how we got here.
Yeah. Well, I'm looking at the document, and what I highlighted many things, but one of them was your call to action, which it kind of kicks off the beginning. And you end that call to action with this quote: "This document is not just about the great resignation, but also about the great recruitment and retainment. It is about the greater leadership required for the profession and the work to come. This document is a call to action to build sustainable careers in higher education by dismantling systems of supremacist cultures in our work. This is a call for agency, regardless of where you are in the organization. It is not a moment left waiting for change to happen, but for taking responsibility and creating change." And I think both of you spoke to, there are challenges, they are real, they are not brand new. And what should we do about it? And I as I shared with both of you, the both and is throughout this whole thing, about the challenges and possibilities, about the difficulties and actions, about the theoretical and the practical, and the both and really connects through this. Well, and it is also broken very cleanly into three parts. What is the problem, which I think we've kind of articulated, really rooted in supremacist cultures, and then some really tangible practical recommendations. So let's begin with that second part. You talk about this being rooted in supremacist culture. Roshanda, tell us a little bit more about what that is and what you mean by that.
Yes, I will certainly
for those who can't see, she's dancing.
Yeah.
She's so excited.
Well, when you read a document that we've been working really hard on and you have such energy around it, it brings it to life for us. And so I'm appreciative of your energy around it. And so I want to tell you how we got to supremacist culture as just an idea, because a person may pick up the document and say, wait, how did we get here? I thought we were talking about employment. Well, know that when we brought all of the 20 so folks to Raleigh back in July, we first wanted to meet with intention. So before even getting to the space together, we read Dr. Salih's book about creating sustainable careers in student affairs and really grappled with ideal worker norms. Also, we started to listen to podcasts. And again, Dr. Salih was on this podcast talking about it with, Dr. Perez and some other folks. And so we started grappling with conversations that they were having. And we read some articles, some dissertations, Britt Williams' dissertation about Black women in higher ed. Oh my goodness. So all of those things converged. But like Dre said, we wanted to contribute something else to the conversation. We didn't want to just regurgitate what all had been said. So on the first day of our convening, we talked about, okay, here's what the research says. But by the second day, we started to say, okay, now why are people leaving? What do we need to do? And by midday, that what do we need to do kind of shifted to who do we need to be as a field?
From doing to being. Powerful.
Yeah. So there was all of this like harm that had been happening. And we started to realize that there is a culture issue happening it was a consistent thread throughout every story we heard in that room. And so we said, who do we need to be as a field? Like, what are our hopes and dreams for this profession? If we want to put something forward, what do we want that to be to really shift where we are? And so we started having conversations about what would a current culture shift mean. And I remember Lena Crane was one of the people who got up. Lena Crane is a brilliant scholar practitioner and friend. She legit came to the front of the room with some PowerPoint slides she just put together. And she said, y'all. She didn't say y'all, that's the country Southern person. But she said, everyone, like, I think some of the conversations that we're having here today can be couched into Tima Akun's white supremacy culture. And at the time, I had not heard about this framework. I had no idea what it was. But from there, Dr. Crane, she basically taught us in real time about white supremacy culture. And as she started to describe white supremacy culture, she started to talk about the ways that white supremacy culture was manifesting in higher education, how the sole purpose of white supremacy culture, which is enacted in all of us, was to divide us, to distract us, to disconnect us from society at large. And yes,
from
it happens.
ourselves.
It disconnects us from ourselves and, how it works within these institutions. And so she started to talk about how all of our values, all of our norms, all of our beliefs in higher ed were rooted in white supremacy culture and how we needed to disrupt those values and beliefs. And so it was so beautifully done. And it was just a moment. And I think Dre was like, "Oh, this feels like a moment." And I was absolutely. It was a moment. Yeah. So we sat there and we started to slowly unpack the different tenets of white supremacy culture. There are actually 10 of those, but we looked at 7 of those within the document. And I'll pull out 2 just for examples. One of the characteristics of white supremacy culture is this idea of fear. So fear, particularly in higher ed student affairs, is like not belonging, not being good enough, feeling afraid, right? And what this looks like in our field is, you have an entry-level professional who's had to compete with other folks for their job and had to really hustle for their job. So when they actually get into their role, they don't even feel like they're good enough. And they're constantly having to prove that them being selected was a good decision. So then they're feeling like they have to stay late and they feeling like they can't make any mistakes and they're feeling like they have to be perfect in their role. And so white supremacy just lays out that fear of not being good enough. You're never good enough. You don't belong here. You got to work twice as hard all the time.
And the perfectionism that comes with that and how toxic that is. Yep.
So that's the second one I'm going to name because I think it pairs well with it. But also perfectionism is one of the second characteristics that we talk about. There's only one way to do things. We don't think about any other way. There's only one leader. There's no appreciation for folks. You just keep working to do everything right. No room for wrong, right? And so that looks like, folks being inflexible with how we show up to work. Like Dre was mentioning, we just proved that we can work from home and do our jobs, right? We just proved that we could. Why are we now saying, oh no, there's no way that we can do that well? That's because we think that there's only one way to do our jobs. And not to think about all of the students and staff that were so encouraged by being able to work from home. And so those are 2 examples of characteristics and domains that we named in the document, but we also mentioned antidotes to white supremacy culture because Tima Okun mentions antidotes in her document as well. So again, we're centering ideal worker norms and white supremacy culture, how it interplays and works in higher education, and then what can we do to interrupt some of those norms that we've all been taught. So it's not just white folks who, contribute to these norms. It's all of us. And, it's how we can move higher education forward by disrupting some of these characteristics. So I'll stop there.
Just as you say, it's all of us that are contributing to this and all of us that need to be part of the solution. So what does that mean for how do we all engage in different ways to be a part of it? Dre, what do you want to add here before we get to the antidotes?
Sure. Yeah. So what was on my mind as Roshanda was talking was urgency, right? And that's the tenet. And both from a micro and a macro. The micro example I give is, I think about the way that we have to rapidly respond to emails at all hours of the day, that we got to get these programs out as soon as possible, like without really thinking about the how or the why or the purpose. And so I think one thing is also really important about urgency that I think is really tethered to, what was happening around the last couple of years, is that there's been this urgency to get back to normal, whatever normal was, right? And without pause. And I used to make these jokes on social media about like, it's going to be like a light switch. We should be slowly like turning on the dimmer, right? And I knew that we would, as a collective higher ed, would want to just flip back to the way campus was, status quo before, without thinking about how we could do the work differently and taking that pause. And I think that was definitely at play when we think about the ways that I saw, even on my own campus, and even I can own as myself as a then hiring person, to see the way I had to rapidly put jobs out as soon as possible without thinking, is this the same job that I really need now to best serve my students in my department? I was so concerned about getting people on the campus in person, not even thinking about safety and whatever, so quickly that I think I made some mistakes. I think other people did too, to really rush. And I think people were making choices about, like, that's not the environment I want to go back into. That's not how I want to feel in my work environment. So I think the urgency, and it's still a part of us, I think there's still that feeling in the air that we can't quite let go of, that is quite harmful overall.
Yeah, Dre, and we've been socialized around it, and so it's been really hard to put it down. For some of us who started this work years ago, this is how we learned that this is what we learned is the work. So even while we as a task force were grappling through these characteristics, we had to do our own unlearning and still are. But but that's what we want our members to do, is to grapple with it, with these domains.
And the unlearning. Right. What unlearning white supremacy. And you begin with white supremacy, but you also open it up into supremacist culture in general, dominant thinking, and some of the things that Dre mentioned around disability and religious oppression and so much more, all of that kind of weaving together. But also, some of us have been in student affairs professionals for a long time, and we have a lot of bad habits, right, that we need to unlearn.
We do. It's terrible,
right? It's toxic. And I think for some of our newer professionals, we're so quick to teach them our bad habits and the way we always do things. You say in the document, collectively we ask two questions. Collectively we ask, one, how might a supremacist culture influence contemporary workforce changes? And two, what can be done to reimagine a new higher education workplace? And I love how you have deep conceptual theoretical analysis of the problem. It's wonderful. It's revealing. And you have some super practical, pragmatic action items that come along with this, which you frame as antidotes, which I just love. Right? We want to understand the disease and also the antidote to that. We're not going to have a time to get to them all. We're going to try and play with them here a little bit. But Roshanda, why don't you tell us a little bit about some of the antidotes and recommendations for action?
Sure. So I want to name that antidotes is actually a part of Okun's language. And so we're cool, but we're not that cool. We took that language directly from that framework. So I do want to honor her work in that. But I want to say that we are all about practical recommendations in our field. In the words of Dr. D.L. Stewart, student affairs is an applied field. So if nothing else, we want people to, in real time, like Dre was saying earlier, use the document. Think about where they are in their career. Think about what questions needs to be asked in real time. And so that's what we wanted. So using Okun's framework, using ideal worker norms and conversations across the task force, we mapped out appropriate antidotes or solutions to our work. And we thought about them in 4 different areas, right? So recruitment and hiring, training and development, administrative structure, and even compensation and morale. And we split them up in this way because we wanted this document to be really accessible for folks who just want to skim, read quickly, give them the meat. We wanted to include the meat in this 3rd section.
And I'll say it's really well organized in that way. The 3 parts, these 5 or 4 components, it's really well organized for that. So thank you for helping us readers through the journey.
Oh yeah, we know what it's like to get lost in a document, and we don't want anybody to have any excuse about why they didn't know how to move forward. So we gave clear instruction. That's
There's
important.
Even numbered lists and bullet points and charts.
Yes, we love a chart. And so I'm going to give an example of one of my favorite antidotes. and just give some thoughts around that. So one of my favorite ones is to reshape marathon job interviews to focus on what is essential to understanding candidates and consider what can be learned by employers and candidates using other parts of the hiring process. So what that essentially saying is, why are we doing these marathon interviews, right? As a field, you all think about this. How many of us have been invited to campus for a 2-day long interview, back to back, no lunch being had? I identify as a fat body person, so having to like wear a blazer and traverse across campus, and you're hot and you're tired, and by the end of the day, by the end of your second day, you don't even care if you have the job because you just want to go home, right? You're just like, I did all I can. I'm exhausted. I just want to go home. And so in this antidote, we're like, how can we reshape marathon job interviews? What would it look like if we centered what is essential, most essential in this hiring practice? Dr. Dobbs, one of the task force members, said in a conversation, like, we need to stop asking, like, what's your favorite color, red and blue? What does this mean? Like, how can we be more intentional about these questions? How can we build the space where, only the most important folks are included in the conversation? Like, who needs to be included and who doesn't? We don't need to waste the whole department's time in this one interview space across months at a time. Do we even need to invite people to campus anymore, right? Just from COVID, we learned that we can do some really amazing things virtually, even virtual tours, and thinking about things in that way. And so that's an example of one of the areas that we really wanted to nuance, is just rethinking how we can do the campus interview. And so I have more, but I'll wait in case Dre wants to share any of hers.
Well, this one that you're mentioning, I think it came up and was part of the impetus for our conversation around a hiring episode, which, I had people talk about these marathon interviews, and one person said, we bragged about our 1.5-day process and how every candidate would get sick at the end of it. We bragged about that with pride. And he's just like, what were we thinking? What were we doing? And so to me, that says not only do we do it, but we pride ourselves on dehumanizing process. Like, how integrated into our thinking is it that we would brag about a process that made people literally ill and sick? And how do we unpack that? That's the unlearning.
And then, Keith, don't let a search fail, because then you're like, oh, we got to do it again.
All over again.
you are irritated in the next group of interviews, and it has nothing to do with the candidate, but you're just exhausted. And we've been doing it for years. So
Unlearning. Dre, what are some other antidotes that you love?
Yeah, so it's probably because it's on my mind right now. So a part of my role at Davidson is I do a lot of staff recruitment and retention, and I've just got done. I'm actually not finished, but I'm in the middle of onboarding our cohort of new staff. And so often we
talk a little bit about the size of that cohort, because I think that's important.
Yeah, so we're a small liberal arts college. My division's about 70 some odd people, and I had to onboard about 22 people. Which is,
like a third.
It's a third of us. Yeah, it's a good amount of people. And so, I used to make these jokes last year, like, as I got all the emails about the people exiting, like, who will be on our campus? And I just want to name and give a shout out to my campus and my colleagues. Like, the fact that we were able to recruit very thoughtfully in a very short amount of time is remarkable. But I'm also noting how exhausted my colleagues who are deans and department heads are to do that. And so one thing that I think is relating to the document in a way, my supervisor created my role in particular to be the mindful person of our staff and retention and our professional development to look at supervision. And one thing that's been on my mind about onboarding this particular cohort is that so often, and I was kind of guilty of this too when I was a department head, that we focus on the job function. Making sure they know the skills, maybe the departments to do the job, but we forget about who they are as people, right? So I'm a woman of color, queer woman of color, if that. And so just a small thing of like, I needed a space to get my hair done, or a spaces for doctors and things like that. And so trying to have a mindfulness of our staff as full employees who, whether they have families or not, that they need their own personal needs taken care of, you know,
Mhm.
and I think a lot about, you know, particularly campuses where maybe they are one of the few folks of color, or few queer people there, and they need to find community and connection. And if our staff are not fully happy as human beings,
Come
they will
on.
not be fully successful employees on campus. And so we have to
Mhm.
think about not just the job, not just the climate of the campus and understanding the alleged cultural norms and traditions of our campus and belonging, but really belonging to the community that they are now, if they are moved or kind of integrating into as well. And so I've been thinking a lot about how do I get my staff linked into what Charlotte has that's exciting, or what different, you know, of color, queer. I'm thinking a lot about mental health and wellness, and how do I make sure that
Mhm.
they are connecting to local doctors that, you know, can work on variety of schedules. And so that's been on my mind a lot.
Well, CrossFit's my life. Where can I go?
Me too. I'm a
Listen.
CrossFitter. So yeah, so that was
Whatever.
the first thing I did is got a CrossFit gym when I moved here. And so yeah, those are really hugely important things.
Yep.
And I think that is going to help us over time. And I think of an employee who's new is seeing that the campus doesn't just want me here for the work that I do. They want me here as a person and want me to thrive here as a person. They're going to want to, ideally, I hope, stick around the campus that they see values them as a human being, not just this tangible person getting a job done for the sake of our students overall.
This is another
Yeah.
thing we have in these conversations all the time, is that people do not want to be treated as employees or
No.
Right.
workers. They want to be treated like people. Right.
Yes.
And I think that's a major shift,
Yeah.
particularly. I think there's some generational things in there.
Yes.
I think there's COVID made people things people wanted before, now they don't want, they need. And they're saying, you know,
Absolutely.
this isn't a nicety. This is something that has to be a part of the conversation.
Well, yeah, also, but in so long, you know, before you were told to take any job, like when you came out of grad school or when you had your first job, you were like, go anywhere, do anything. And now I know I need a Black therapist. I need a loctician. I need a Wegmans. That's my grocery store of choice. And there are things that we need. And I think it's okay to say that and provide new employees, like, well, talk to us about, you know, where would you like to live, or what do you need for your family to be successful here? Because if you see me as a whole person and you give me space to set up my life in a way that I feel good about home, then I will show up to work every day.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Right. And so I love that you named that, Dre.
I also think we got to remind people that you can't be picky about everything, right? You can't be picky about location and institution and function and student population, right? Right. You can be picky about some things, but you got to be open about some things, right? So that you have some choices, so you have some options. But you're saying you're real clear with yourself about what I'm picky about. And that means I am flexible on these things. I think people get too picky about everything, have very few options. But people who are like, I'll go anywhere, I'll do anything. I'm like, I don't know how to help you.
Right.
You need something to narrow the scope a little bit.
Yeah. One or two things. Yeah, definitely.
Yes.
Well, I think we're going to try and do something fun here. There's so many great antidotes and recommendations. We're never going to get to them all. We get two really great in-depth examples. We're going to move to the rapid fire round, right? And so they're dancing again, folks. So three real quick, and I think we'll go back and forth. Roshanda, we're going to start with you. Which antidote do you see as the simplest to implement? What is just so easy to implement?
The marathon interviews one that's got to be it, because
just don't do it.
Don't do it. And I think we've recycled these schedules. I was guilty. I would just copy a schedule that I used last year and the year before and the year before that.
Same.
But really spacing it out, giving people opportunities to use the bathroom. I think Rosie Perez said that on one of the other podcasts. People don't even have an opportunity to use the bathroom. People don't have an opportunity to make a phone call, take a break. I think there's some really easy ways that we can do that. And we just had to do it. So it's not going back to that one way, is what I would say.
Dre, what's the simplest to implement?
Other duties as assigned. We use that as a catch-all for some really shady things. Let me be honest. It's a shady way to talk about ways to kind of slip in work. And so I'm a big believer, be explicit. What does that mean? Give examples, say specifically what that is. It's not fair to set up an employee to do these things, you know, after they got the job, after probation, that may not either be aligned with their skill set or, you know, in their desires a functional area. It's just a really shady practice that we got to get out of. Totally.
And I love how you talk about it. Talk about the both and like other duties as assigned shouldn't be 50% of your job responsibility. Right. It should be like 5%. Like it's some occasional things here and there. But if you're being told it's other duties assigned daily, then we've missed.
And I think we could share what some examples of what that might look like in that section of our job description. It could look like sitting on a task force. It could look like, you know, attending this meeting. So people know what they're getting into ahead of time.
Exactly.
Dre, what's the most obvious recommendation for you?
Performance review. I've changed my mind. Performance review. You know, so often we just take what HR gives us as a way to evaluate our staff, and it's never truly aligned with how we do things in higher education. And I'm mostly focusing on student life, student affairs in particular. If we could, something I did recently with my staff is that I sat down and took the HR model and said, this is what this means for our department. This is what this looks like. And another small example to kind of really unpack that is that I had my staff think about what are some behavioral goals that you have for your performance review and what are some outcome goals. And I think we get so caught going back to the quantity versus quantity part of Okun, supremacy. Like if we could talk about, yes, there may be some tangible things that you want them to be able to successfully advise or put on a program or what have you. But what are some things you really want your staff to like learn and grow from too? So that could be that you really want them to learn about how to do some curriculum design. You may want them to think about how they are learning how to do some strategic planning. So how do we create both of those things through a performance review is a really good one. I think we do performance reviews terribly in higher education overall. So yeah.
Roshanda, what's the obvious one to you that you thought, do we really have to write this down? Isn't this so obvious?
Oh my gosh. And I changed mine too, Dre, so don't feel bad. But I was just at SACSA in Birmingham, and I said this in a meeting with senior level folks. And I said, can we just put the range of the salary on the position description? That's it, because that will let a whole lot of folks know what the expectation is right away. Right. And so I think that's something obvious that we can do that folks are doing in other industries that is a game changer. And then folks will know exactly what they're getting into. No one's time is wasted. Folks are not surprised. There's none of that. I think that would be something simple we could do if we could work with our HR folks to move forward on that.
It's a huge equity issue for sure.
Yeah.
Well, we talked about the simplest and the obvious. What's the most powerful or most transformative? What's the one that you think, boy, if we can do this, that would be a game changer, Roshanda?
Oh, that's a tough one. I was going to talk about the training and onboarding. Should I talk about that? Yeah, I'll talk about that. I got a lot going on in my brain. My brain's going a million miles a minute. But I would say supervision is and was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. No one prepared me for doing it. I only went through one supervisory training at my institution, and it was all about, how the institution can avoid getting sued. And so I would say if we could really, really, really center ongoing supervisory training for folks. As you get new people, you need to relearn and unlearn some things. As the institution shifts, as we're coming out of COVID or through COVID, we need to all do a refresher. And it needs to be space where people can actually share what's going on so we can also learn from each other. But there's such fear around doing it wrong or the right to comfort that we don't talk about how hard supervision is. So for me, the most powerful thing we can do to keep people engaged at work is to work on supervision, because we know people don't leave an institution, they leave really bad bosses.
This is a great example, because just in you're talking about it, you're threading this very practical example back to the supremacist culture and perfection and can't make mistakes and comfort and all of that. It's all really tied in. So you can see how this is not just a nice fancy social justice framework. It really organizes things.
Definitely.
Dre, what's the powerful transformative one for you?
Yeah, so I'm thinking a lot about morale, but I'm also thinking a lot about it's been on my mind. I haven't quite figured out the way to I've been trying to figure out how to write about it or talk about it, but I'm still going through it myself.
I'm so excited for what's coming next now.
Me too.
I feel like I feel like higher ed is grieving, right? I feel like we've been, and I'm deeply intimate with grief. I lost my parents about 11 years ago. So I know grief well, and I've been feeling that collectively, that we're collectively mourning what higher ed was and what it could be. There's literally staff, unfortunately, that passed away. I just got one of those emails recently, and I've been grappling with that overall, but also like, we've had loss in our own lives, it's a loss of different things. And so I really am thinking a lot about our morale. I'm thinking a lot about the fatigue that even though for some people it may feel better, they may have to staff, they're not maybe one-person offices anymore, but they're still tired, right? They're still, the student issues we're dealing with are still going on. And so I've been thinking a lot about how do we create spaces of rest and better boundaries and better care. And I did talk a lot with that recently with my symposium with the ACPA president, but
so good. It was so good.
Yeah. And one thing I've been like dreaming about, and I've been saying it for years, is I would love a sabbatical for staff. Like I would love to just take, a semester or have a complete summer off where I can just recover, take care of myself, like clear my head. And then whenever I do get some little bit of actual true rest, I come back to the work more like energized, more clear, new ideas, like ready. And I just feel like the last few years in particular, it's been a different type of an exhaustion plus grief that I just never can quite recover from. And I wish you could find ways on our campuses. So whether that's short-term sabbaticals, I've been dreaming about going to semester at sea. I had to think about leaving my job completely to do that, or just taking a minute just to like, I don't know, like declutter my house. Like I would love that we would be able to create those more organically in our work without feeling like I may have to lose my job or make a harder decision, or that the work can't go on without me. So I wish we could be in that conversation more.
Or wait till it gets so bad that you qualify for FMLA.
I was just about to say that, Key.
Yes.
I was just about to say that. That is a thing.
Real.
Yeah.
Real.
And I have a partner who works in the nonprofit world who we argue that we do the same work, but they are allowed to take sabbaticals in that job, and they are staff. And it said they take the sabbatical because the work can be so challenging that they need the space to breathe, do whatever, take care of themselves, and then come back to the work with a more fresh perspective.
Right.
And I'm just like, how are we not there yet?
Exactly.
Well,
yes.
We're running out of time, folks. As we knew we would. This podcast is called Student Affairs Now. We always like to end with, what are you thinking, troubling, pondering now? And if you want to share where folks can connect with you, where might they be able to do that? Dre?
Yeah.
What's with you now?
Yeah, we're probably going to out us when we're recording this, but I'm thinking heavily about violence on our campus. And so at the time of this recording, we just got word about a shooting at the University of Virginia. And so I'm just thinking very heavily about not only the loss of life, but, I'm thinking about clearly there are staff that are now having to step in and support a variety of people and families, and how that's compounded upon many other things. And so that's been very heavily on my mind. So heavy, but that's where my mind is. In terms of connecting with me, I'm on the social. So I'm more of a Facebook person these days. I am on Twitter at Andrea Domingue. I'm also at ACPA President on Twitter for a little bit longer. You can Google me for my email address, and I am on LinkedIn. And by all means, you're happy to contact me at any time.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Roshanda, what's with you now?
I think Dre and I are on the same page, because I definitely was going to mention some of that grief and like where we are in the world, and how I just woke up with a heavy heart. But I think aside from that grief, there's also joy. There's also a hopefulness that we have. The three of us would not be here if we didn't hope for change. And so what's on my heart is, as we're moving through this season of grief and love, that we can also tell the truth with care, and we can hold that, and we can move towards joy and towards hope for the future of our field. and that people truly use the documents that we've provided as a jumping off point to get them started to think differently about our work and to have hard conversations, again, from a place of love. So that's what I'm pondering. And how you can reach me, that's a great question. If you're coming to ACPA, which you should be, you should sign up today, unless ACPA already happened. You can come to convention in March in New Orleans. We'd love to talk to you there. I'm also on LinkedIn at Roshaunda Breeden. Don't know how much longer I'll be on Twitter, but for now I'm there as Dr. Breeden. And so, yeah. Feel free to engage with us because we are regular folks and we like people.
I do like people. I do. I actually do.
It's good to have that reminder. Well, I love that you close us out there, Roshanda, because I think as Dre's talking about sabbatical and the space and time for grief, not just sabbatical, but space in our day, space in meetings, you're really bringing in the both and of grief and other difficult emotions. And where do we need sabbatical or space in our day for joy and love and liberation and all of those things? And sometimes we crowd that out too. We don't make time for that. And that how you articulated that both and essence is all throughout the document. Things are hard and they can be better. This is difficult and I do it too. There's theory and solutions, and it really comes through all throughout. And it just feels very like the folks who contributed to this really get what it's like, have been there, have been through it, and aren't talking down to you. They're talking with you. And I think that really comes through all of it. Yeah. Thank you. Well, this has been terrific. Congrats on the report and getting it out. It should be available to ACPA members, and then maybe down the road, open to available to others who want to be able to access it. It's a really great document. If you've liked this conversation, be sure to check it out. There's so much more in this report that'll be really helpful to folks than what we've been able to talk about here today. And thanks to our sponsors of today's episode. Reshape partners with colleges and universities to create transformational leadership experiences, both virtual and in person, for students and professionals with a focus on creating a more just, caring, and thriving world. Reshape offers engaging learning experiences on courageous dialogue, integrity, equity, resilience, and community building. To find out more, visit leadership.org/virtual programs or connect with them on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And how will your institution rise to reach today's socially conscious generation? Today's students report commitments to safety, well-being, and inclusion are as important as academic rigor when selecting a college. It's time to reimagine the work of student affairs as an investment, not an expense. For over 20 years, Vector Solutions, which now includes the Campus Prevention Network, formerly EverFi, has been the partner of choice for more than 2,000 colleges, universities, and national organizations. With 9 efficacy studies behind their courses, you can trust and have full confidence that you're using the standard of care for student safety, well-being, and inclusion. Transform the future of your institution and the community you serve. Learn more at vectorsolutions.com/studentaffairsnow. And as always, a huge shout out to our producer, Nat Ambrosi, who does all the behind the scenes work to make the three of us look and sound good. And if you're listening today and not already receiving our newsletter, please visit our website at studentaffairsnow.com, scroll to the bottom, check out the archives, and add your name to our MailChimp list. My name is Keith Edwards. Thanks again to our fabulous guests today and to everyone who is watching and listening. Please make it a great week. Thank you both.